When the true form of truth is recognized as residing in scientificity, or what is to say the same thing, when it is asserted that truth finds its element of existence solely in the concept, I am fully aware that this claim appears to stand in direct contradiction to a prevailing conception and the consequences that flow from it. This opposing conception has not only gained significant presumption, but has also entrenched itself deeply within the convictions of the age. Its widespread acceptance has lent it an air of inevitability, shaping the intellectual and cultural landscape in ways that obscure the necessity of the scientific form of truth. Given this context, it is neither trivial nor superfluous to address this contradiction explicitly, even if, at this stage, it serves only as an assurance of how the position being opposed can be understood. This prevailing conception, with its influence and popularity, often presents itself as self-evident, requiring no justification. It may rest on assumptions about the nature of truth that are intuitive yet superficial, emphasizing immediacy over mediation, or subjective feeling over conceptual rigor. Such a stance may regard truth as something that can be grasped directly, without the labor of systematic thought, or as something that resides in individual conviction rather than in the objective unfolding of reason. The widespread acceptance of this view does not make it correct, but it does make it powerful, creating the appearance of a contradiction when the necessity of scientificity is asserted. To many, the claim that truth exists only in the element of the concept may seem alien, overly abstract, or even elitist, as though it places truth beyond the reach of ordinary experience or common understanding. This reaction stems from a misunderstanding of what is meant by scientificity and concept. Far from being an imposition or a narrowing of truth, the scientific form is its liberation, for it provides the structure through which truth can be comprehended in its totality. The concept, as the medium of truth, is not a mere abstraction, but the vehicle through which the unity of particular and universal, of subjective and objective, is realized. The contradiction between this view and the prevailing conception is therefore not merely a disagreement over terminology, but reflects a deeper divergence in the understanding of truth itself. On one side is the notion of truth as immediate, individual, or intuitive. On the other is the recognition of truth as mediated, universal, and systematic. This divergence is not accidental, but rooted in the historical and cultural conditions of the age, which have given rise to a certain resistance to the demands of systematic thought. Addressing this contradiction requires not only an explanation, but also a reorientation of how truth is approached, understood, and valued. Here, however, my aim is more modest. Rather than fully resolving this contradiction, I seek only to provide an assurance that the position I advocate, the elevation of truth to scientificity through the concept, can be understood in light of the position it opposes. This assurance is not intended to dismiss or deny the validity of the opposing view within its own limits, but to suggest that it is incomplete, a partial expression of truth that must ultimately be subsumed within the systematic whole. The contradiction, properly understood, is not an obstacle, but a moment within the dialectical movement through which truth comes to know itself. This explanation, then, is not merely a defensive gesture, but a step toward reconciliation, a way of showing that the position I advocate does not negate the convictions of the age outright, but seeks to comprehend and elevate them within a higher framework. By addressing the contradiction openly, I aim to clarify the stakes of the argument and prepare the ground for the systematic presentation of truth in its true form. Only by engaging with this contradiction can philosophy fulfill its task, not by retreating into the assumptions of the age, but by advancing toward the scientificity in which truth finds its ultimate existence. If it is claimed that the true exists solely in, or more precisely solely as, that which is alternately referred to as intuition, immediate knowledge of the absolute, religion, or pure being, then a fundamental opposition is established to the form of the concept as the mode of presenting philosophy. This view, which sees the absolute not as something to be comprehended through systematic thought, but as something to be felt, intuited, or immediately apprehended, shifts the focus away from conceptual rigor. The absolute in this perspective is not something to be analyzed or articulated, but something to be experienced in its raw immediacy, beyond the reach of reason or the mediating structures of thought. This standpoint demands the rejection of the conceptual form for the presentation of philosophy, insisting instead on a form that privileges the immediacy of feeling or intuition. It regards the conceptual as an imposition, an artificial construct that obscures the purity of the absolute, rather than revealing it. From this vantage, the absolute is thought to be ineffable, a reality that resists all attempts at definition or systematization. It is not something to be comprehended through the dialectical movement of thought, but rather something to be directly encountered, whether in the immediacy of religious experience, the intuitive grasp of its presence, or the mystical sense of unity with being itself. This view often identifies the absolute with being, not as understood through divine love or relational engagement, but as pure being, existing in and of itself. The emphasis here is not on relationality, mediation, or synthesis, but on immediacy and presence. It asserts that the true form of philosophical engagement with the absolute lies not in the concept, but in the feeling or intuition of this being. Consequently, philosophy, under this paradigm, is stripped of its scientific ambition and recast as a reflection of subjective experience, where the focus is on expressing the unmediated encounter with the absolute. From this perspective, the role of the philosopher is not to articulate the absolute through logical structures or conceptual frameworks, but to provide a medium through which its feeling and intuition are expressed. This approach tends to elevate poetic, religious, or aesthetic forms of expression above systematic philosophy, regarding them as more faithful to the ineffable nature of the absolute. The absolute, in this view, is not a subject for thought, but a presence to be felt, a truth that lies beyond the reach of reason and can only be accessed through the immediacy of intuition. While this standpoint has gained considerable traction, it represents a significant departure from the idea of the absolute as comprehensible through the concept. It challenges the scientific form of philosophy, suggesting that the effort to grasp the absolute through reason and systematic thought is not only futile, but misdirected. Instead of the dialectical unfolding of thought, it demands a retreat into the immediacy of experience, where the absolute is encountered in its raw and unmediated form. Yet this position, while offering an alternative vision of how the absolute might be apprehended, also raises questions about the completeness and coherence of its approach. Can the absolute truly remain beyond the grasp of thought? Or does the act of intuiting it already involve an implicit form of conceptual mediation? Does feeling or intuition, in its immediacy, adequately account for the dynamic and unfolding nature of the absolute, or does it risk reducing the absolute to a static presence, severed from its movement and development? These questions point to the tensions within this perspective, which will need to be addressed in the course of a systematic engagement with the nature of the absolute and the role of the concept in its presentation. When the emergence of such a demand, for the absolute to be apprehended through intuition or feeling rather than the concept, is understood within its broader historical and cultural context and viewed from the standpoint of the stage at which self-conscious spirit presently stands, its deeper significance becomes apparent. Spirit, as the self-developing reality of consciousness, has progressed through stages that reflect its evolving relationship to essence, truth, and itself. What becomes evident is that spirit has moved decisively beyond the substantial life it once led in the element of thought, beyond the immediacy of faith and the unexamined certainty that accompanied it. In earlier stages of its development, spirit existed in a state of harmony with essence, characterized by an immediacy that required no critical mediation or reflective inquiry. This immediacy was the foundation of faith, a state in which consciousness felt assured of its reconciliation with the essence of reality. Essence, in this context, was not something separate or distant, but was experienced as present both within consciousness and in the outer world. Spirit, at this stage, lived in a unity that was felt rather than known, a state where the certainty of reconciliation was unchallenged and the presence of essence was taken as given. However, spirit has since moved beyond this stage. The immediacy of faith, with its unreflective certainty, has been transcended, giving way to a new stage characterized by reflection and self-awareness. In this transition, spirit has swung to the opposite extreme, the stage of substanceless reflection into itself. Here, spirit no longer experiences the comforting immediacy of faith or the unity of essence and existence. Instead, it turns inward, retreating into the abstract freedom of self-consciousness. This stage is marked by a sense of alienation, as the assured connection between consciousness and essence dissolves, leaving spirit to confront itself as an isolated, self-reflective subject. Yet even this stage has been surpassed. Spirit has not remained trapped in the abstraction of substanceless self-reflection, where all connections to essence and reality are severed. Instead, it has moved beyond this extreme as well, seeking a higher synthesis that reconciles the immediacy of its earlier faith with the reflective freedom of its later self-consciousness. This synthesis does not simply return to the earlier state of unmediated unity, but incorporates the lessons of reflection, creating a new, mediated unity in which spirit comes to know itself as both substance and subject.